latitude, prevailing winds and ocean currents, mountains and the nearness to the sea. Things like that determine what we call the climate, determine what the climate of a place will be.
Welcome to Cambridgeshire Climate Talks with Antoinette Nestor
and Amy Munro-Fall.
Well, Amy, it's brilliant to have you back on the show today, and sadly as our last program for this term. You never know when we're going to come back again anyway, but how's your week?
Yeah, I'm really glad that I could come back on for the last show. My week has been good. It's been very, very busy, as with lots of people around the university in the run up to the start of term. There's just a lot to do to make sure that everything is ready.
So yes, as this last program today, we have 3 interviews. So we have Stefan Haselwimmer from the Cambridge Carbon Map, Sarah and Philipp from the UK Citizen Assembly. And we also have Emily Grossman talking about XR science and how she became involved in the movement. So it is a very interesting and very full program.
Can't wait.
Right, so first we actually have Sarah and Philipp telling us all about the UK Climate Assembly. Sarah and Philipp, thank you very much for joining us today. And for our audiences, would you mind telling us your name and what you do, please?
So hello everybody, it's a real pleasure to be here today. My name's Sarah Allan and I'm Head of Engagement at the Public Participation Charity Involved, and we ran Climate Assembly UK for 6 select committees of the UK Parliament.
Excellent.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm also really delighted to be here today. I'm Philipp Verpoort and I'm a co-director of the Saltution Foundation, and we also contributed to the delivery of the UK Climate Assembly.
And now that the Climate Assembly has finished, what did you learn about it? But just before we set into that, would you mind explaining to people who have not heard about the UK Climate Assembly what it was meant to do?
Yeah, of course. So Climate Assembly UK was the first ever UK-wide citizens' assembly on climate change, and it brought together 108 people from all walks of life and all across the UK to answer a specific question, which was about how the UK should reach its legally binding target of net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. So that was a challenge set to it by 6 committees, 6 select committees, cross-party committees of the House of Commons, and the Assembly members met over 6 weekends to learn all about the issues, discuss them with one another, and then reach their conclusions.
And Philipp, how did you become involved with the Climate Assembly?
So earlier last year, the 6 select committees that Sarah just mentioned from the House of Commons, they announced that they would like to run this process, this UK Climate Assembly, So we have for some time, the Involve Foundation, also the Saltution Foundation and many other partners in the UK have been promoting the use of citizens' assemblies for climate change. We have also been running quite a few local climate assemblies in the UK. So there have been ones in Leeds, in Camden, one also just recently started off in Arden Worthing. And also there was, by the way, a citizens' assembly in Cambridge on topics of transport and congestion and air quality and so on. So basically the idea was around for quite a while, and we were very delighted to hear last year that the House of Commons decided to take up that initiative and basically convene such an exciting project. And then, obviously there was an open tender and all these sort of things. And luckily the Involve Foundation, together with the Saltution Foundation and My Society and a few other partners, together we were awarded this contract to conduct this project. And that's how we came about to deliver the UK Climate Assembly.
Excellent. So how many groups in total were involved with the UK Climate Assembly?
Well, a lot of different people involved in running Climate Assembly UK in different ways. So there was Involve, the Saltution Foundation and My Society, who led on the delivery of the Assembly, but there were also, for example, a wide range of stakeholders and specialists involved in advising it on its content in climate change, particularly what we call the 4 expert leads, who made sure that the content Assembly members heard was balanced, accurate and comprehensive, and focused on those key questions that the UK needs to address about how we get to net zero.
Now, we saw on social media and on the news quite recently when the Climate Assembly ended that this is what needed to be done. But can you just summarize what the results were?
Yeah, it's a really hard thing to do because they were so, the path to net zero covers so many areas, you know, from how we travel to how we heat our homes to what we eat, that the results are diverse. But to give you a feel, so for each of the areas that the Assembly looked at, the Assembly reached conclusions firstly about the key considerations they wanted government and parliament to bear in mind about that area. So for example, about how we travel and the path to net zero. Then they looked at what they want to happen, so what the future should look like, and then how we should get there. They came up with 50 recommendations overall, but running through them are a number of really key themes. So for example, the Assembly thought it was very important that the path to net zero is fair for people in different regions and different incomes, working in different sectors. They also wanted to see it make the most of potential co-benefits, as they're called, so things that would improve people's health, help local high streets, improve the economy. And the idea of freedom and choice was really important to them too. The idea that individuals and local areas should be able to pick the solutions best suited to them, backed up really by much better information and education for people to help them make an informed choice.
And Philip, since your organization was involved in the recruitment, as Sarah said, did you learn any lessons? Were there things that you have done perhaps done in a different way in order to have more people, or how do you feel about the whole recruitment and how it went?
Yeah, thank you. So I think the recruitment actually went really pretty well. So just for everybody who does not know about how the process exactly works just yet, it's people are recruited through something called a civic lottery. So that means letters are sent to random households across the UK. In fact, 30,000 letters were sent to random households. And from the responses that we get, we then recruit the actual Citizens Assembly participants, who were then 110. So 2 dropped out, so in the end it was 108 participants who are broadly representative of the UK population. In terms of a number of categories, such as characteristics such as age, gender, education, ethnicity, whereabouts in the UK they live, and whether they live in an urban to rural area, and also, interestingly, what their attitude to climate change is. So I think that went really well, and we had a pretty good response rate. So about 1,800 people responded to this, which we thought was a very good turnout. People were very interested and very keen to participate and give advice to the UK Parliament on big issues such as climate change. Now, of course, there was a certain bias towards people with who are less concerned about climate change, which is perhaps kind of to be expected given the topic of the Assembly. We nonetheless in the end managed to find people who represented the UK population in terms of what their answer was to the question of how much are you concerned about climate change. So this was perhaps one of the biggest challenges, to really find a representative group of people in that regard. But yeah, I think also from the interviews that we've seen and how people responded afterwards, after the process, I think we can definitely say that we have had a very diverse but also very representative group of people in the room.
And what about plans for the future? I mean, would you like to do more climate assemblies like every other year, or is it just something that was just a once-off, and then, you know, once you put everything together, all the material and responses, and would you just do something else with it, or what's the plan for the future?
So the Assembly members were really clear that they wanted to see more engagement of people in how we get to net zero, including more citizens' assemblies, and they wanted that both at a national level to inform what the national government does next, if it gets in kind of more of the gritty detail about how this happens, but also really at a local level to give local people a say about how getting to net zero works in their area.
And Philip?
Yes, of course. I think it'd be great to have more of these projects in the future. So as I mentioned, we're only just starting with the Allan and Worthing Climate Assembly. I think just last weekend, they actually had their first weekend. And we keep new projects popping up everywhere in the UK, but also actually across the world. We're also helping to facilitate a project in Hungary at the moment, actually, in Budapest. So yeah, I think there's a big appetite for these types of projects to involve people in decision-making about climate change policy making. And I'm sure there will be more interest for this in the future. And as Sarah said, especially those participants from the assemblies, they keep saying that this was a really great experience, and also the people who are responsible for the policy making tell us that it was a very helpful feedback for them. So I believe it will be useful for the future as well. Yeah.
And you started the Climate Assembly pre-COVID, and then you have 2 sessions during lockdown.
So the plan was to have 4 weekends where people met face to face, the Assembly members met face to face, and 3 of them happened exactly as planned. And then COVID arrived in the UK, and we moved the 4th Assembly weekend online. And when we did that, we split that over 3 weekends, the same content over 3 weekends, just to keep it accessible and enjoyable for people.
And how did that work? Were they happy just to be online, or did they really miss that face-to-face interaction? How did the people react to it?
So I think some of them were quite surprised about how much you can do online, that they could listen to people in the same way, still have their group discussions, still reach their decisions. Some people saw advantages to it, more convenient not to travel, smaller carbon footprint as well, not having to travel. But I think a lot of them did miss some of the more informal side of it. So you'd have your discussions around tables, and in the coffee break, they'd have a chat to each other, keep thinking about it, come up with some of their ideas. So there was a bit of a kind of sadness not to be able to meet face to face anymore, but they felt very thankful that they'd got to meet face to face before we moved online.
And then as a last question, and this is perhaps a bit more personal, what would you like to see maybe from 5-10 years time taking place with climate change, climate assemblies, or just anything in relation to net zero in the future? Philip?
Yes, of course, that's a very good question. I mean, for us, from the Sortition Foundation, we would just generally like to see the opinions and the recommendations put forward by everyday people who participate in citizens' assemblies in the UK, for these recommendations to really be taken seriously by whoever is convening them, whether it's national or local government, to really take into account those very helpful and very useful recommendations put forward by the people, and not just kind of say, oh yeah, thank you, and put it on a big pile of other reports and say, okay, maybe we'll look at this at some point. Really take that into account and take it seriously. That's my hope for the next few years. And of course, we are on a very good path for that. But yeah, more has to be done, of course.
And for you, Sarah?
So the Assembly members were really clear that they wanted to see strong leadership from government and also a cross-party approach to tackling climate change, given how urgent that most of them felt it was. So I'd really like to see that for them. And then from Involve's point of view, just continued engagement of people because of the impact these decisions about how we get to net zero will have on people's lives.
And Sarah, what came out of the assembly? Can you tell our audience a bit more about that?
What came out of it is a new and a really valuable body of evidence about public preferences for how to get to net zero. And we've already seen Chris Stark, Chief Executive of the Committee on Climate Change, which is the independent advisory body for the government, say that this is a very balanced and a very measured set of recommendations that he really feels, if he was a minister, that he would hug close and really take seriously.
Sarah and Philip, thank you very much for joining us today. It has been wonderful having you on the show, and hopefully we'll be able to see many more climate assemblies around the UK.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You're listening to Cambridge Zero Climate Talks. And Antoinette, that last piece, I really think the Climate Assembly is just such an interesting idea. Like the idea of getting people from such a bottom-up way to talk about the things that they think are going to happen in a way that's informed and qualified, in a way that people might actually listen to them. It's just really cool.
Now, I have a very interesting conversation as well as with Stefan Haselwimmer from the Cambridgeshire Climate Map, and his idea as well is very interesting about how we can all collaborate and add our little grain of salt into this whole issue of how we can record CO2 emissions around the country.
So, Stefan, thank you very much for joining us today. And just let our audience know that if you can hear the background noise, we are at the Cambridge Botanic Gardens on a face-to-face interview, finally, keeping, of course, social distance. So it's just, it makes it very, very different and very special as well. So, well, Stefan, thank you very much for joining us today. And for our audience, would you mind telling us your full name and what you do, please?
Certainly. So my full name is Stefan Haselwimmer. My background's sort of in kind of social enterprises and sort of community action, I guess. And really, I think things sort of got going last year when I launched a thing called Cambridgeshire Climate Emergency, which was basically trying to sort of take this very big, imposing problem, climate change, and very scary, and basically trying to break it up into kind of bite-sized chunks so that communities across Cambridgeshire could actually take meaningful action. So, yeah.
So, you, as you said, community enterprises and community activism. I mean, on the ground, once you learned how Cambridge and Cambridgeshire works on the ground, there's so much taking place, so much happening. So, can you give us perhaps a big overview of what's taking place when it comes to climate change in Cambridge and Cambridgeshire?
Oh, that's a big question. So we've essentially there's quite a lot of existing groups already out there. What we saw our role is basically trying to reach out to those communities that possibly weren't necessarily doing very much, sort of around Cambridgeshire. So sort of going beyond the city of Cambridge, looking at places like North Cambridgeshire, that actually is at risk of flooding through climate change. So it's very much a pressing issue for those kinds of communities. And our approach is really, it's not about telling people what to do, it's about essentially trying to cultivate local leadership in communities. So people that, think, I quite fancy doing something on climate action, what can I do? And we help to support them and build a network, get them to meet other people. And just generally, try and see this as a very positive, enjoyable experience rather than a kind of doom and gloom approach.
And in relation to, we were talking before this interview about the other projects you have going at the moment. So can you tell us a bit more about the projects that you have going at the moment?
Sure. So, I suppose our general approach is to try and find sort of new and fun and engaging ways of doing things. So, as an example, we launched a kind of a Cambridgeshire Climate Map last year, which was trying to kind of make it sort of the climate action more visible, more accessible. And then, beginning of this year, we launched a thing called a Cambridge Carbon Map. So that's about trying to bring together different stakeholders in Cambridge City, so that we can all basically see where we are with carbon emissions and hopefully take action in a coordinated and collaborative fashion. So that's the carbon map. And in addition to that is a new thing that we've been working on. And we're not quite sure how it's going to play out, but the idea is the way to engage people on climate stuff is to, I think, make it a lot more fun. Right? I think over the last decades, there's a lot of kind of doom and gloom and taking it very seriously, and that's fine if you're the kind of person that likes to get anxious and worried about things. But lots of people that actually want to have a kind of a positive experience. So we're all about trying to find ways of possibly developing games and activities that are enjoyable, that are about being future positive, rather than being about fixing the climate. Because I think fixing the climate, it's quite a sort of a technical thing. And actually, people want more kind of human-centered stuff. They want to hang out with other people, have an enjoyable experience, start to develop a kind of positive vision of the future. And so really that's what we're trying to kind of get going, I suppose, as a project. So, yeah.
And talking about positive vision about the future, can you expand on the cover map?
Sure. So, this sort of the foundations of this project were I was sort of sitting in a pub with an academic from the university, and I was saying, wouldn't it be great if we could all sort of essentially sit around the table and kind of work out where we are and where we need to get to and kind of work together. And he said, okay, let's do it. And within a week, this was Hugh Hunt. Within a week, he'd organised a meeting and got a bunch of students and people from the town to come together. And then we was like, okay, what do we do? I said, why don't we just? I said, one of the things that always bothers me is we can't see CO2; it's invisible, right? If there was a way we could actually visualise it, that would help us actually get more of a handle on what we're doing. You see. So I said, why don't we do a map? And he said, okay. And then within another week, we built together a team of people. So we had students, we had people from the town, there's a teacher from one of the schools in Cambridge, and we started working on this idea. And basically everyone kind of is very enthusiastic about the idea, and we're now working on the first release of the software, which is due to go out there hopefully in the next few weeks. And we've also started talking with other towns in the UK, so talking with Brighton, and they're very interested as well. And yeah, I mean, it's a simple idea. Where are we with carbon emissions? Let's put it on a map, and we can all essentially see where we are and work out where we need to get to.
So in relation to the software, would people be able to download it from your website, for example, and then for them to start plotting different sort of what they've done during the day, or how does it work?
So the idea is to have, so in a particular local community, you'll be able to set up an account and start putting in your emissions. So if you're a business, you can put in your site number and then put in your emissions for that. And then you'll see it pop up on the map, and you can instantly see essentially that your little bit of the map has been coloured in. So it's a bit like a huge community jigsaw. And that's the start. And then moving on from that, you'll be able to talk about the things that you're doing as well. So if you're doing, exciting projects with, renewable energy in your top of your office building, or you're doing a community ground source heat pump, whatever it is, put that on the map as well. And then people can be seeing what other people are doing. They can get in contact and then sort of build a community of change makers, as it were, to actually start to take action on this.
And you mentioned Brighton. So what is your idea? Is that each town and each city will have some sort of map that then you will collect and make some, like perhaps a national sort of network of different maps? Or what's your vision?
Right, so the vision is pretty ambitious. We want to have a map for every village, town and city in the UK, which is technically, just on a technical level, quite ambitious. In terms of the data collection, again, that's quite ambitious. But weirdly, when you essentially set your sights high, it turns out that actually a lot of the data is already out there, and it's simply a case of bringing it together, building some technology on the back end, and then presenting it to people. So we are hoping that we're going to have the plan is to have the first test of a kind of a national map towards the end of this year. So quite exciting. Don't hold me to that, but that's the plan anyway.
And in relation to your own background, Stefan, how did you become involved? I mean, you're very passionate. When people could see how passionate you are when you're talking about the project. How did you become involved into climate change issues and working with the community? Like, does it have a long history, or you've always been involved with it?
I have a rather checkered history on climate, actually. I first heard about climate, what it was called global warming, back in 1988. And I went to a lecture in London. I was only 16 at the time. And this chap gave this very sort of scary lecture about how, we're all doomed and gloomed. And I was so scared by that I went vegetarian. I refused to learn to drive for many, many years. I voted Green in my first election that I could vote for. But I sort of was waiting, as the years rolled on, for government to kind of fix this thing. I'd assumed that it was down to big government. And then in 2015, something happened that really made me think there's another way of approaching this. So this was at the height of the refugee crisis. Again, a very sort of similar problem, very big, very imposing. It's like, what can we do as individuals? Not really very much. And then this group called Citizens UK got in contact, and they basically said, we can't solve the whole refugee crisis in one go. But what we can do is look at what we can do as a city, And so try and choose a relatively sort of bite-sized problem to fix. And they proposed if we can resettle 50 refugees in each town and city across the UK, that would be significant. So as a result of that, I set up a thing called the Cambridge Refugee Resettlement Campaign, and we brought together a bunch of people, and we got organised, we got trained up through Citizens UK, and I suddenly realised actually that if you are organised on a community level, you have an incredible amount of power, and it was really exciting as well. It was exciting to suddenly realise things were possible. And so we managed to persuade the city council to resettle 50 refugees. It was a huge result for us as a group. And then at the back of my mind, I was thinking, if we can do this for refugee stuff, we can do this for climate action as well. So as a result of groups like ourselves across the UK, so we weren't the only group by any means, there's been 11,500 refugees who have been resettled in the UK. And that's down to essentially community groups working together, coordinating, being trained and being effective, and they have had a huge impact. So similarly, I think if we can do a similar thing with climate action, if we can get communities empowered, trained up so that they can help to work more effectively, I think we can have a huge impact on how we address climate change. There's a tendency to think of action as either individual action or government action. And what I saw in 2015 was actually a huge gap in the middle called collective action, community action. And when that actually really works effectively, can achieve incredible things. So that's really what I'm passionate about. I'd love to see every community to be really empowered, to really know what they can achieve and work in a coordinated fashion, and to really start to try and aim for net zero sooner rather than later.
And when it comes to community empowerment and community action, do you think that the current technology is helping or is not really helping when it comes to bringing communities together?
That's a very interesting question. So one of the things I learnt through Citizens UK was the profound quality of having what's called a one-to-one, a face-to-face meeting with somebody. You sit there in a room and you tell them your story, the other person your story. And it's two people in a room, two human beings in a room, and it's incredibly transformative. Now, can that be achieved through a Zoom call? Well, possibly. What's exciting about Zoom calls is that I'm talking with people that I would never have been able to talk to before, because suddenly the kind of barriers are lowered. But it's still nice to have a face-to-face. It's still nice to be here today with you. There's something really important about being physically present with somebody. So I think we just have to kind of do the best that we can, keep reaching out, as individuals with other individuals, building connections, and then as you build connections, you build relational power, and that's how I think it's possible to change things.
So you think focusing on solutions is, of course, is the way to go, and collaboration. So do you feel that at present there are too many groups trying to do the same thing, but maybe in disparate ways, or they're just not coming together because of perhaps divisions that they may have within their own points of views? How do you see the whole sort of, now this is no community landscape?
I think there's a tendency to look at things in quite a siloed way of thinking. So you tend to sort of think, if I can talk to the head of this organisation, because they have the power. And what we've seen with the carbon map is what I call a kind of a collaborative dance almost. It's about saying, this is a new thing. We'll talk to anybody who is interested in working on the project. And so it's trying to find spaces that don't kind of fit into the conventional way of addressing a problem. So trying to find innovative ideas that sort of say, that sounds fun, let's get involved, right? It's like, I'm trying to think of a good example here. If there was a kind of a free rock concert on Parker's Piece, right, and you saw it, you'd probably wander over and kind of listen to the music, wouldn't you? You wouldn't kind of go, oh, am I invited? Because it's a free thing, it looks fun, and you join in. And I think those kinds of initiatives that are, are fun, are very open. It's not about whether you need to pay for a ticket to come along. Then you'll come along and you'll be part of it, and you'll meet new people, and you'll get a nice experience. And I think it's that kind of way of framing how you bring people together. I think is really interesting. And just basically promoting the positive stuff. Make it positive, make it fun. Anyone's welcome. Come along and make some new friends. It's about making new friends, really.
And Stefan, in an ideal world, what would you like to see perhaps 5-10 years from now, or even tomorrow?
Well, I suppose actually it's not what I'd like to see. I'm more interested in what other people would like to see. I think there's a tendency to people like, cards on the table. I'm a middle class white Oxbridge graduate. Okay, my vision of the future is probably not that interesting. But the vision of the future of people that aren't being listened to, that is what I find exciting, right? Because I've seen this going out around Cambridgeshire. You'd sit with a meeting and people would have these ideas, and I'd be like, I love it. That's a brilliant idea. Let's do it, kind of thing, right? And there are lots of these ideas out there, and I want those ideas to kind of come off rather than anything that I have a particular vision for. So weirdly, my wish is not for me. It's to give my wish to everybody else, so they can have a wish too.
That's wonderful. So I think actually it's more of empowerment and believing in ourselves, in our own personal power. If you want to frame it like that we can actually change the world and not be something that is just a saying, but it takes place. And do you feel that actually people do not really feel that, or perhaps they feel that they're too little to make a difference? And is that changing? Are people starting to feel that even though they're little, or maybe just an individual, that it can still make a change?
Absolutely. There's a lovely line from Lincoln. He said in one of his speeches, he said, we here, hold the power and bear the responsibility. And for me, that is an indication of that we all have power. Unfortunately, most of us don't feel that we do have power. But once you start to feel even a small amount of power, you suddenly realise actually that, what's possible. And so, let's get everybody to feel their power, not just the people that, are in positions of privilege already, to be honest. So.
Wonderful. Stefan, thank you very much. And if people want to get a hold of you, do you know your website address?
Yes. So if they email Stefan, Stefan, at carbonmap.uk.
Stefan, thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Cheers.
This is Cambridgeshire Climate Talks.
Wonderful. I really enjoyed listening to Stefan. And Antoinette, could you tell me a bit about your last interview to Emily Grossman, right?
Yeah, that's right. I had a wonderful chat with her. I mean, she was telling me all about how she became involved with the movement and what, scientists in their group are trying to do and all the new projects that are taking place. So it's a very interesting and very insightful conversation.
Emily, thank you very much for joining us today. We appreciate your time within your very busy schedule. And for our audience, would you mind telling us your name and what you do, please?
Hi, it's really nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me. My name's Dr. Emily Grossman. I'm a science author, broadcaster, and educator. And over the past year, or actually past 18 months now, I've devoted my life to turning my form of science communication to communicating about the climate and ecological crisis. So I've become, I'm an advocate for women in science particularly, but I've also become a climate activist, and that's where my passion lies at the moment.
And to start, how did you first become involved with climate change issues?
So really the first time that I became involved in any way in what's going on, or even being aware of what's going on the planet, was about 18 months ago, April 2019, when I went along to the second Extinction Rebellion protests. Now, I didn't go along of my own accord. I went along to, well, it was my own accord, but I went along primarily to support my partner. So my partner Kimway McCarthy, was playing in the Samba band, and he was also singing some of his songs and doing spoken word on the Pink Boat in the middle of Oxford Circus. So I went along to support him, and I was sort of looking around, and I was hearing all these people shouting, you know, mass extinction and societal collapse, and millions of people, billions of people could die, and you know, civil unrest. And I'm thinking, like, really? Is it really that bad? Because I wanted to be there to support Kimway, but I also was like, you know, I'm a science communicator, I'm a scientist, and you know, I have quite a large following on social media, and I've dedicated my life to kind of helping the public to understand what's going on in the world. And I didn't want to be sort of seen to be supporting something that felt, quite honestly to me, a little bit uncomfortable, because I was like, you know, obviously I know that climate change is real. Obviously I know that humans have caused it and that it's definitely happening. You know, I've been learning about that since being at school. You know, I've got a degree in natural sciences from Cambridge University. I've got a PhD in molecular biology. You know, I understand that global warming is real, but I honestly thought, you know, has it really gotten this bad? Surely these kind of crazy, what seemed like sort of alarmist slogans are just a little bit extreme. So, you know, I wanted to retain my sort of scientific integrity and not really get behind something unless I was completely sure. And I thought, well, you know, the reasons that I thought that this really surely can't be that bad is first of all, if it was really this bad, then surely it would be on the front page of every newspaper. You know, it would be like top of the bill on every news report. We'd be hearing about it all the time. Secondly, I thought if it was really this bad, then the people in charge of the country, you know, the grown-ups here, would be doing something about it. You know, how naive I was. But, and I also thought from a personal perspective, as someone who has, like I said, dedicated my life to communicating truth, to finding out what's going on in the world, to helping others understand the world, and to making sure that I'm really sort of aligned with the truth in the world. I thought, well, it seems odd that if this were as bad as all that, then, you know, why have I not been invited to give talks about this or to write about it? And so I just thought, well, you know, this is a bit uncomfortable. They're probably a little bit slightly crazy, these loonies. So I decided to put my mind at rest, really, to kind of go on a deep dive to find out everything I could about what's going on the planet, if nothing else, just to reassure myself that like it's really not that sort of apocalyptic and catastrophic as these activists were implying. And you know, I know how to research information. Like I said, I've trained as a scientist. I know how to get to the truth. I know what articles to read and what peer-reviewed journals to go to and which experts to speak to. And Extinction Rebellion already had a team of climate scientists and ecologists who were working alongside them. So I went to speak to them, and I just dedicated a huge amount of time to really finding out what was going on. And I can honestly say that I have not had a single good night's sleep since. Because the more I found out and the more I discovered, the more horrified and terrified I became that not only were the things that the Extinction Rebellion activists were saying on the streets, not only were they true, that absolutely, if we don't make radical changes now, we're heading potentially for the sorts of temperatures that could lead to civil unrest, that, you know, the knock-on effects of food shortages, of extreme weathers, of droughts, of fires and floods, of fresh water scarcity because of melting glaciers, of sea level rise, you know, this could very easily lead to civil unrest, ultimately societal collapse, and potentially the deaths of hundreds of millions, if not billions, of lives. That this is absolutely true, and the things that the activists were saying were not only true, but actually things were an awful lot worse even.
And Emily, as you became aware of this, how did you proceed? How did it affect what you were doing at the time?
As I became aware of this, with this kind of growing sense of dread and horror of the sort of nightmare that's unfolding on our planet, I just thought, well, you know, nothing I do in the world has any value anymore except for raising awareness about this crisis. And I was already writing my second kids' book. My first kids' book, Brain Fizzing Facts, came out last year and it's doing really well. And I was already in the process of writing my second one. So I was like, well, I certainly want to devote that to talking about the climate and ecological crisis. And the very least I can do aside from that is to get involved with Extinction Rebellion and to try and get scientists, the other scientists, join with them to get the scientific message out there. So I joined with a small group of scientists who were already involved with the Extinction Rebellion cause, and we founded a group called Scientists for Extinction Rebellion, now known as XR Scientists. And we got out onto the streets. We wore our white lab coats. We got out into the roads last October, so a year ago, and we protested in the City of London, and we refused to move until people took seriously what's going on the planet. And it's not just us. There's the Scientists' Warning, which is over 13,000 scientists now have declared clearly and unequivocally that the Earth is facing a climate emergency. And in fact, as Scientists for Extinction Rebellion, we then went on to write a declaration to state why, after 40 years of scientists raising the alarm in the way that scientists are traditionally supposed to do, which is calmly and impartially and trusting that if we report on truth, the government and the media will report to the public about it and will act appropriately and according to that truth. Now that has clearly been broken, that unspoken contract that scientists will do that and that government will act, that media will report it, has clearly been broken. So this declaration that we then put together as a group was to say that now, because this has been broken, what scientists have left to do is only to protest, to take peaceful protest, civil disobedience, non-violent direct action, even if at times it goes against the bounds of the law, because this is too serious for action not to be being taken. And it's not, nowhere close to the level to which it needs to be taken in order to prevent absolute catastrophe and devastating impacts to human life, not just to animal life. And this declaration we put together is now, well, within a month, actually, it was signed by more than 1,700 scientists and experts across the globe who were all coming together to say that, yes, it's not enough now to just report on truth. We need to actually force governments to take notice, and we need to get people with us on the streets so that meaningful action is taken.
So, Emily, did you realize anything else by drafting this declaration? Was there anything about the public participation in general so government could listen? Could the public do anything else?
We also realized that one of the reasons that people, perhaps everyday people who don't necessarily have the time or the expertise to devote to really finding out the truth about what's going on, with all the fake news and propaganda and unclear reporting of the situation, and no one knows really where to go to get the information. For every article that's telling the truth, you have another article that's kind of spinning it or covering it up or saying scientists say this and that when it's actually not really scientists at all, or they've been funded by big oil. So we decided that what was really needed to get more of the public on board, not just scientists, in order to get out on the streets and take action to make the governments listen to us, is that we really needed to have somewhere where everyday people could read in a way that was easy and accessible and easy to understand, could read about what's actually going on the planet, all in one place, from what's happening today, why it's happening, how humans have caused it, how we know for sure, the arguments that can be used to combat skeptics who say, oh no, it's Earth's natural cycles, or, it's sunspots, or solar activity and all this stuff, which isn't true. And that there was no really one big resource in easy to understand language, because the IPCC reports are very complex, even for someone like myself to really understand. And to combine that with where we're heading, where we're heading, depending on what action we take, and what governments are and aren't doing, and what action we need to take to address this. So over the past year, well, actually more like 14 months now, we've been working on a sort of a big project, which we've just launched, which is the Emergency on Planet Earth document or guide. It's a free online guide to the climate and ecological crisis. Like I said, written in very simple language, very easy to understand. It's easy to access. It's available as a Google document so that you can download it, print it off. People are already using it in schools, people are taking it to their workplace. And we've also now just had it published on the Extinction Rebellion website as their sort of science content under the emergency, well, the truth and then the emergency.
So Emily, can you expand on this guide and give us more details, please?
So this guide has been something that we've pulled together a team of experts from all different disciplines related to the planetary crisis, from agriculture to ecology, to land use, to rising seas and oceanography, to paleoclimate records, to predictions as to what's going to happen politically and socially as we go forwards, and to an understanding of the current political situation and what is and isn't being done. And we just really wanted everybody to be able to read this and to understand it. So that's been the culmination really of my journey over the last 18 months as a science communicator. I'm the lead author of this guide, but very much supported by a team of fantastic contributors and experts. And this guide has now been endorsed by, you know, leading experts across the field, IPCC authors. And what we want now is to just get that word out, to get people to dip in to this document. You know, you don't have to read the whole thing. It's got a very easy to navigate contents page where you can just dip in and work out which bit you want to engage with. And we really hope that once people really know the truth, once people really understand just how bad this is and just how radical the action is that needs to be taken in order to prevent moving towards a situation in the next few decades where we're going to be getting droughts and floods and fires, preventing crop growth. It's going to, with knock-on effects, causing food riots, causing water shortages, and people not getting enough food to eat, even in countries like the UK, where to some extent we're protected at the moment from some of the most extreme weather, but that is going to change. You know, we're getting more and more floods and storms. We're getting more and more heat waves and droughts. So we've got 24 people a day already dying in London from air pollution alone. And by 2050, the rising seas across the globe, because of melting ice and because of expansion of water as the temperature rises, the rising seas by 2050 are going to displace hundreds of millions of people whose homes are going to be flooded at least once a year, who are going to be living below the high tide level, at least once a year. And, you know, these are including people across lots of parts of the coasts of the UK, near the banks of some of the rivers, like even parts of central London. And then that's not even mentioning things like deforestation and soil erosion, loss of wildlife. We're losing 1 million species are at risk of extinction, many of those in the next few decades. And within those, there are many species of insects which we require to pollinate our crops. Our crops are required to feed us. So if you put that together with rising seas, with extreme weather, which is going to linger more and more in certain areas and inevitably lead to crop failures. If you also add that together with changes in land use, which are making diseases more likely to be transmitted from animals to humans, where we're going to get more and more pandemics, where we're going to get more and more loss of the creatures on our planet that are needed to sustain life, and direct threats to human life as well, direct threats to health, because rising temperatures increase the rates of transmissions of infectious diseases. We're already seeing much higher rates of infectious diseases in parts of the world. We're seeing diseases come back in areas of the world where they haven't been seen for a long time, such as malaria is coming back in Europe. So, you know, we're talking about threats to human health from many different directions. And we're talking about particularly the children and the elderly being most at risk here. And, you know, we're already seeing it with COVID. We're already seeing that we have a global pandemic. You know, you only have to watch the Attenborough documentary on BBC to have it really clearly laid out for you, the link between what we're doing to our planet and the possibility of more pandemics like this arising, and the direct threats to our survival. And there's people like Attenborough, and there's people like, you know, leaders of the UN and the Pope and the former Archbishop of Canterbury and leading scientists across the globe who are saying this is an emergency. This is an absolute direct threat to our existence. You know, we're not saying that every human on the planet is going to die. That's pretty unlikely. But this is going to affect, in some way or another, every last one of us, everything that we hold dear. And whether we like it or not, it's coming, and we have to do something about it.
And what about the community of scientists you're part of? Can you tell us more about it?
The community that I'm part of, we're very much, you know, Scientists for Extinction Rebellion, we're very much about making sure people know the truth, and then from that place of knowledge, making sure that people are empowered and inspired and engaged enough with this issue to then get out onto the streets and take action, because it really isn't anything that we can now do as individuals. This is something that, yes, of course, it's important that we stop flying, that we radically cut down on our intake of animal products, that we insulate our homes, that we switch to a green energy provider, that we check where we're investing our money, that our bank doesn't invest in fossil fuels, that we leave the car at home as much as possible, that we use an electric vehicle where we can't, but ideally we use public transport, we walk or we cycle, and most importantly, that we cut down on our, I was going to say consumerism, of course we need to buy things, but that we're much more mindful about buying things that are made to last, reusing things, repairing things, recycling things, because everything that we buy is made in a factory, and most of those are imported from overseas, and we're talking more and more fossil fuels being used to make the products and then to import them. So we need to radically rethink how we shop, how we travel, and how we eat, and what we do with our homes. But none of that alone, none of it, no matter, even if we all did it, that is not going to be enough, because a huge amount of our carbon emissions and our methane emissions are tied up in things that only the government can really affect. You know, at least a third of emissions in this country are to do with things that individuals have no power over in terms of lifestyle changes. It has to come from the top. And also, you know, we're not going to make those lifestyle changes enough unless we're supported by the infrastructure, unless we're supported by the government. And in fact, it was a really, really stark reminder of that during the peak of lockdown, during the height of lockdown, during the peak of the epidemic, the pandemic of COVID, even though there was virtually no travel, there was no planes, there was virtually no sort of consumerism outdoors, although obviously people were buying online, there was still only a 17% reduction in emissions. And so this shows us that actually individual action, lifestyle changes, is not enough. You know, we need to do that in order to feel that we're living to our values, and also to put pressure to show the government that we're willing to make change. You know, because governments say, oh, well, we won't change because people won't change. Well, we need to show we're willing to change. But fundamentally, the governments aren't going to change unless we get on the streets and take action.
And Emily, what about the government target of 2050? Do you think that as a scientist, is that enough?
Carbon zero 2050 is nowhere near fast enough, and we're not anywhere close to being able to hit that target anyway. Carbon emissions are still rising, they're not falling. In order to have even a 50-50 chance of staying below 1.5 degrees heating since pre-industrial times, we have to get to net zero by 2050. But that means that and that's only a 50-50 chance. And 1.5 degrees heating is the level stated by the IPCC, where, you know, even a fraction of a degree heating above that, it's been laid out how much more devastating the impacts are going to be. You know, every fraction of a degree counts. It's not like we go over 1.5 and suddenly we're toast, but, you know, there's people all over the world who are already being impacted by climate, by extreme weather, by rising seas already. And it's just going to get worse and worse. And every fraction of a degree that we can keep below the 2-degree target, which is the dangerous level according to the Paris Agreement, but we're actually heading for 2 degrees around 2050 at current emission rates. We're heading for 1.5 degrees around 2030. And that's absolutely unthinkable. You know, we're heading for 3, possibly 4 degrees by the end of the century. And climate scientists and experts have said that this is just beyond the realms of of terrifying, basically, that this could be happening, that we could get to a place at which, you know, huge parts of the world are going to be too hot for people to live on, where we're going to have millions of species going extinct, where we're going to have enormous rises in seas, where the extreme weather is going to be causing absolute devastation. And the point is that we need to start bringing emissions down right now. They need to be at least halving by around 2030 and going down to net zero by 2050 at the absolute latest, ideally much, much earlier than that, especially in wealthy countries like the UK and the US, where we have more capacity and capability to bring emissions down. We have the infrastructure to do that. And we also have the most historical responsibility, because we're the ones who've been emitting carbon in such high levels since the Industrial Revolution. So, you know, that taps into sort of climate justice, the fact that we, as the sort of the percentage of the world, you know, the top 10% of the world release 50% of the emissions. And so we really need, as wealthy nations and wealthy people within that nation, that those of us who can really need to be going out there, putting pressure on the government to bring emissions down. And actually that's, like I said, not been happening. The UK government's own climate advisors, the Committee on Climate Change, reported this summer that having set a load of targets and a load of standards that the government needed to meet in the next year, they reported back, the Committee on Climate Change reported back this summer that actually the UK government is falling staggeringly short of meeting these targets in terms of reducing emissions, that out of 21 targets, 17 were off track. And not only that, but the government is failing to prepare us for the nightmare that is to come. They're failing to prepare us for a 2-degree world, which is where we're heading by 2050. And in fact, the Committee on Climate Change is saying that they really now need to be preparing us for a 4-degree world, 4 degrees hotter than the Industrial Revolution, because that is now where we're heading. But there is a staggering failure for them to bring emissions down anywhere close to as fast as they need to be coming down, and to prepare us for what's to come. So we're in a really, you know, dire situation. Action needs to be taken. It's not too late. It's not too late to turn this around. And every fraction of a degree does count and does make a difference. So every little bit that we do will help. But it's only really now by coming together and taking collective action that we can put the pressure on governments that is needed and show them that we would be behind them making the changes required, and specifically to back the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill, which is being presented to MPs and needs to be voted on, which is going to, if it gets through, which it absolutely has to be, you know, we need people to write to their MPs, we need people to say this is what needs to be backed, and that is to kind of enshrine care for the climate crisis and the ecological crisis into law, such that emissions targets are reached and met, such that damage to the natural world is addressed, and we start to restore some of the devastating impacts that we've been having on our planet.
So, Emily, if people wanted to write to their MPs about this bill that you mentioned, what should people do?
Great, yeah. So if you want to find out more and find out how to do that, the best thing to do is to go to the web address www.ceebill, that's ceebill, bill.uk, and that will tell you everything about that.
Excellent. And if people wanted to download the beautiful report that you just published, where would they go?
So there's 2 places that you can find that. Firstly, you could go onto the Extinction Rebellion website and you could look under the truth and then the emergency. So the actual web address is, bear with me, the actual web address is www.extinctionrebellion.uk, and then it's /the-truth/the-emergency.
That's brilliant. Emily, thank you so much. It has been wonderful to get to know about how you started your work and how important and pressing climate change is. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.